Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we've got a nice little 7-game slate. Lots of injuries today, as we've gotten accustomed to lately. This slate seems okay. I think pricing is pretty good today, actually, so I don't hate it, but there's a lot of guys out and probably a lot of information that we don't have yet for injury situations. With that said, we had a good night last night. Let's keep continuing that. We've had, I think, 5 wins in the last 6 days, so let's keep that up. Let's go ahead and get into the injury report here, and then we'll get into DraftKings and then FanDuel. So with the injury report for the Nets, we have Durant, Claxton, and Sumner all questionable, and Simmons out. For the Pacers, Duarte is out, and Jackson is questionable. For the Clippers, Jackson and Powell are out, and Mann is questionable. For the Wizards, Beal is out, Wright is out, and Hachimura is out, and Barton is questionable. For the Cavs, Mitchell is questionable, and Love is questionable. For the Celtics, Horford is out. For the Warriors, Wiggins is out. For the Jazz, Markkanen is questionable, and Conley is questionable, along with Sexton being out. And for the Nuggets, Porter Jr. is out, and Murray is probable. And for the Timberwolves, Towns is out. So it's not as bad of an injury report as we've had, but it's still a lot of guys that are questionable that we're going to have to pay attention to at this point. But let's go and get into the players I do like here. Let's start here on DraftKings. We're going to start with Nickel Alexander Walker for Utah. He's been playing the last 2 games with Conley out, and I expect him to continue to play well. His price is literally minimum priced here, so I think he's a good play on the slate. Then we'll look at Seth Curry for the Nets. With Simmons back out again today, he should get more run. His minutes have been kind of sporadic, though, and he is very scoring dependent, so do keep that in mind. But his price point is okay here, and he's somebody to take a look at least to consider. Monte Morris here from Washington is in a good spot here. Now, he didn't play particularly well yesterday, only had 17 fantasy points, but I do think he'll bounce back here. He's been playing really good with Beal out, and so I look for him to continue, especially with all the guys out for the Wizards today. Then we'll look at D'Angelo Russell from Minnesota. He's been playing extremely well lately. He's just been really consistent, I think, and I think he's a guy that I really like today, especially as long as Gobert, as Towns is out, he's just really played himself up. Now his price point has skyrocketed as a result as well, but he's still viable on the slate plus matchup. Then Buddy Hield for Indiana, he's been playing extremely well the last 4 games. His minutes have really maxed out, and I do look for him to continue that. And his price is just too cheap for what he's been doing, so I think he's very viable on the slate. Joe Harris looks interesting for Brooklyn as well. This should be a high-scoring game, and he's been playing pretty well lately. Typically, I don't like him, but he's been playing really good, and his price point is still pretty fair. Obviously, he can have minutes going all over the place, but with a couple injuries to the team, he's playing quite a bit of minutes starting and stuff like that. So I definitely think he's viable. Excuse me, I'm about to sneeze. Denny Abdija for Washington, he's been playing extremely well lately. He's had some really good games. He had a couple of off games, but his minutes are pretty much maxed out with all the injuries to the Wizards, so I look for him to continue. His price point still hasn't popped up yet. Then we'll look at Zach LaVine here for the Bulls. He's been playing extremely well lately. His price point is pretty fair, even though it has popped up a little bit. He's just been performing extremely well, and he's a very good player, and he's somebody I really like, especially in good matchups. Now, obviously, this is a tough matchup against Dallas, but he's got a lot of upside anyhow. Then we'll look at Karis LeVert for the Cavs. Assuming he ends up starting again, he'll be very viable on the slate at this price point, but we do want to make sure that he ends up playing and starting and that the injury situation there doesn't change. Then we'll look at DeMar DeRozan for Chicago. He's an interesting spot here. He's been playing really well lately. And his price point is pretty fair. He does have 50 fantasy point upside in this matchup, and he's been a good player. I think only one bad game in the last like 7 or 8. Then we'll look at Jaylen Brown here for Boston, and I also like Tatum. Okay, both these guys look really good today. Plus matchup against Golden State. He's been playing really well, and I think he's a viable play on this one. He's had some really huge games lately, and I look for that to continue. And then we'll look at Jared Allen for the Cavaliers. He's been another guy that's just been very inconsistent, been playing okay. He does project well today, but I think he's a little bit hit and miss lately. I do think he's kind of more of the secondary player center than the primary play, But if Kevin Love is out and some other injuries to the Cavs, that would definitely benefit him in this matchup. He should get it in the mid 30s in the minutes perspective. And then Joseph Nurkic, he's the guy I like the most today for Portland. He's just been playing really good lately. And his price point, while it has popped up slightly, he's still really viable at this price. He really hasn't had many bad games, and this is a nice plus matchup against Minnesota, so I look for him to have a really good game. And then let's go and get into the FanDuel situation here. Pricing over here is not as ideal as it is on DraftKings, but still good today. We're going to start with Seth Curry for Brooklyn. He's very scoring dependent, so that is an issue with him, and his price point is a little bit higher here on FanDuel than DraftKings, but he is viable on the slate with all the injuries to Brooklyn, especially if some other guys end up sitting out as well. Then we're going to look at D'Angelo Russell here from Minnesota. Sorry about that, guys. I was sneezing. The He's been playing extremely well with Towns out, and I look for that to continue here. He's just he hasn't really had any terrible games. His price point's pretty good. Obviously, he's a little bit better on DraftKings than FanDuel, but overall, he's still a viable play. Monte Morris has been really solid with Beal out. He didn't play good yesterday. He only had 7 real points, but I do look for him to bounce back here and have a bigger game, especially with all the guys out for the Wizards. Then we'll look at Kyrie Irving. He just looks really good here on on FanDuel. His price point's a little bit too cheap, and he's been playing extremely well. And then we got some injuries to the Nets as well, which should benefit him even more. So Jaylen Brown also looks really good here on FanDuel. He's been playing extremely well the last 4 games, and I look for that to continue here. Tatum is also viable on the slate, but I do think Brown's a little bit safer. DeMar DeRozan, for the Bulls looks really solid today at $8,200. This is too cheap for what his potential is and how much upside he has. Even in a tougher matchup, he's going to get a lot of opportunity in this game. Then we'll look at Zach LaVine, who's another guy for the Bulls I really like. I know it's a kind of a tough matchup, but it should be a high-scoring game, and so I look for both DeRozan and LaVine to play well. And they're both viable on the slate here on FanDuel at their price points. And then Denny FDG for the Wizards. He's just been playing extremely well with the Beal out and stuff. Even though he had a couple bad games where he didn't play a lot of minutes, he's been playing a full complement of minutes now. That will continue today, and he should have viable fantasy output here. Then we'll look at Malik Beasley for Utah. He's really been playing well coming in the last couple games. Though he does have a very low floor, he has a nice ceiling in these matchups, and I like him a lot here against Denver. And then Jarrett Allen for the Cleveland. Now he's a little bit better here on DraftKings on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings because he does tend to get some blocks and stuff. But he's been playing pretty well lately, and I do like him a lot here, especially on this site because he has power forward / center position. But he's just got a lot of upside and has, especially if a couple guys end up being out for them, he should have some upside. Then we'll look at Porzingis here. His price point is not super ideal, but he's been playing extremely well. He does have tendency to have quiet games, but this is a matchup where he's going to have a big game, and so especially with all these guys out, so I look for him to be a great play on this slate. And then Joseph Nurkic, he's my favorite center overall. He's just too cheap for his production lately. He's really had a couple bad games lately, and with with injury situation to the Portland, he's been playing and having a higher usage. But he's got a nice matchup here. And then Rudy Gobert, he's a little bit too cheap here on FanDuel for what he's done the last couple games. Obviously, he hasn't been all that good this season, so he's definitely a secondary play. But he's a good play off of Nurkic if you prefer to go off Nurkic. So I think he's viable on the slate. With that said, this slate is interesting. It's pretty good today. I've seen better slates, but I've also seen worse. We've had a ton of injuries this season so far. But I think we can continue our win streak. So let's go ahead and get at it, and have a nice day, guys.